Hi, everybody. Mary here. You've heard me talk about conscious communication at work. That's why you're in this Facebook group. While I incorporate a number of modalities in what I do, I do mention NVC a lot, particularly around communication skills. And some of you already know a little NVC. Sometimes we talk about it like it's a foreign language. But if you don't, here is my super speedy, itty-bitty mini intro of NVC in 10 questions or less. I'm going to endeavor to give you something useful and compelling very quickly. So question number one, what is NVC? It stands for Nonviolent Communication. It's developed by psychologist Marshall Rosenberg. It's both a set of linear tools, and by many, it's also kind of thought of as a consciousness, a framework for being more compassionate in today's divided world. It's used in schools and businesses as a sort of a framework in some restorative justice practices, mediations, therapy rooms, and of course, a ton of personal growth retreats and workshops around the globe, of which some I am the leader of. It's used in a lot of different levels, both interpersonally, and then collectively. So, two, what's up with the name? So I made a video about this, but the very short answer here is that Rosenberg was inspired by the nonviolence movements of Gandhi and King. And he really wanted this body of work to support world peace. He was very interested in working at this societal level, but would argue that most of us were in fact conditioned to think in certain violent ways, most notably to ourselves, as evidenced by how self-critical and perfectionistic some of us can be from time to time. So that's the deal there. Number three, what is the difference between NVC and some of the other soft skills or EQ trainings that you've probably already been to? Well, so if you've learned active listening or negotiation skills, or you know a little bit about personality type through MBTI or Enneagram, you might see some overlap. When I teach at Google, I do occasionally hear, especially when I'm doing the shorter intros, I do occasionally hear, I already know this stuff, but when I teach my 4-week class, that's 8 to 10 hours long, I hear this class needs to be longer. We've just barely scratched the surface, and we could make this a whole, there could be a part 1, a part 2, and a part 3. And, I hear things like that. And I tell them I know, but that they probably wouldn't have signed up if it were a year-long commitment, right? So what I do like about NVC is that even right away, it does start to drill down into very nuanced but very crystallized concepts that can support something like, instead of this, try saying that. So it's about doing a lot of thought work, but it is quite linear and granular. So it covers a lot of bases. Number 4, does it work? Well, when applied and integrated over time, NVC has a major impact on workplace culture. It'll reduce the amount of meetings you need. It makes your meetings shorter and more effective. It increases job satisfaction, which lowers turnover. It makes collaborations more effective and more enjoyable, which, all of that saves money because, that's what all of those will do. On top of that, it does help managers who don't feel strong in their people skills in developing their talents. So they know what's important to do or to stop doing. But it's also good for managers who feel that they're great with people. They're naturally empathetic and caring, and their reports love them. These managers are grateful to learn more skillfully how to roll out tough decisions or tough feedback or mediate issues between different personality types on teams and so on. So I've definitely seen it work. The research is in its adolescence, but it's growing steadily. And in a number of big organizations, we have a lot of anecdotal evidence of proof of concept. So number 5, that leads me to who else endorses this work at the organizational level. I'm going to kind of focus there. So I told you I primarily work at Google, and if you don't know, there's a video on Project Aristotle and psychological safety. This is something that's it's a piece of research that came out of Google, and like I said, I have a video on that on my Facebook page if you'd like to check that out. And there's also a Times article. You should certainly check that out if you haven't heard about that through the organizational development world, the OD world. But yeah, it's really it's catching on at Google in some really substantial ways. The CEO of Microsoft, it was, gosh, 2 years ago, Nadella, who got a write-up around how when he came into the organization, he handed Marshall's book out to his executive team. And this was, however long ago. But so Microsoft, Merck, Kickstarter, L'Oreal. I have a colleague who has trained thousands of executives in L'Oreal, Etsy, SoundCloud, the UN, major universities, hospitals, a bunch of nonprofits that you've never heard of. There are a lot of people excited about NVC. So number 6, will this help me at home too? Yes. Yes. So 7, key areas of focus. So there are, I'm going to kind of go broad strokes here, high level. So NVC really focuses on the defaults and the conditioning from our culture, how to notice them more. Like you think you're an okay listener, but here's how to notice some of the common blind spots that almost everybody has when they're listening, and what the implications are. You're a caring person, but you don't know how to actively build trust with your team. Like when it happens, you feel kind of lucky, but you don't know specifics, like what you can actually do in team situations, or, with your teenager for that matter. So there are certain skills most people don't even know are there to be developed, or don't realize how big of a deal it is to make very particular little changes like these. There are certain kinds of 1-degree shifts that are powerful. So looking at our defaults and our conditioning, reframes. There are a ton of mindset and thought-based reframes and distinctions that we pay attention to in NVC. We look at them both in the context of connection and collaboration, but we also really look at their very practical usefulness. So we pay attention to results, right? So how are these skills helping teams move things forward? So it's just a quick example. You've probably been conditioned to think a very certain way, to look at the workplace slacker in a very particular way. Well, what if you apply this reframe or that reframe? What if you look at these distinctions? How is it now to be with that person? And how motivated to work is that person becoming to show up differently in their teams? Because, by the way, doing the inner work of reframes and shifting your thoughts and so on is not some just kind of like fluffy, be positive, look for the best in other people kind of thing. It's substantive. It has a little bit of that in a way, but it's really looking about the impact of what you do and don't say, and how like very concrete relationship dynamics change for the better. So another thing, some of the folks I work with, they'll tell me, they come across too blunt. They often get the feedback that they're seen by others as insensitive. So NVC can be really helpful for them because we show them how to still be frank, but compassionate. Well, on the flip side, others can tell me, I'm too quiet. It's so awkward, bringing up these uncomfortable things. I tend to gloss over them. I want to avoid that. And they want to know how to speak up, but skillfully. They want to know like what to say, like what's effective, and obviously we've got all types in the workplace. And so this is something that's helpful for everybody. Okay, number 8. 8 is great. What are some of the common concepts? Just to give you a flavor, you can look this up on Wikipedia and get quite a bit of detail really about NVC, but I'm going to talk about 3 main concepts that if you've had an intro, you've probably heard at least some of these. So one is empathy. NVC certainly does not have a corner on empathy, but has a very particular way of thinking about it that's distinct. We have certain focus points, and we'll have to get into that another time, but there's a way that we train ourselves to both hold the kind of the content of exactly what somebody's saying and the meta, like what's going on between the lines, what matters to this person. And when you learn how to listen in this way, the other person can really feel the difference. You'd be surprised. I mean, they come out of some of these conversations like they're like, I feel seen, I feel understood, I feel really gotten. It builds trust, and it's easy to do once you've trained yourself sort of in terms of like how to make this a habit. So we do teach these sort of like listening skills. Needs. It was hard for me to know, I mean, whether to name this first or not. This is like a core pillar in NVC, and there's almost so much to say about this that I want to save it for another time when I can go through it with a little bit more depth. But for now, I'll just say it can be quite powerful to switch your default mindset from one of like who's right and who's wrong, and how, you know, how are they going to vie for, how is that going to escalate, to what do they need, what do I need, and what can we do that will meet the most needs at play. Now, this switch, it might sound a little elementary at the conceptual level, but I will tell you that people will say that this is often like the most profound part for them at the level of application. So we talk about empathy, we're focusing on needs, and the last thing that you might have heard of is OFNR, OFNR. This is our famous / not so famous formula that's most associated with giving feedback. It's used in other contexts too, but OFNR refers to observation, feeling, need, and request. And within OFNR, there are at least 4, I would argue even more, probably up towards a dozen reframes or distinctions, as I was mentioning. It helps you to do that inner work so that it's more powerful, like you can speak with skill. OFNR kind of gives you like the touch points as to where to think about sculpting your message, you know, and when we're not thinking at least somewhat along the lines of OFNR, that's really when you're more likely to say things that are received with defensiveness, with pushback, resentment, all the things that can be so corrosive in collaborations. So number 9, I'm kind of keep moving here. What are some of the less common concepts? I mean, less common, but pretty dang powerful still. As you move along in this work, you learn about navigating your inner critic, hearing and saying no with connection, translating judgments, translating criticism that you hear from others, that you can, you know, these sideways conversations can get back on track. You know, where everyone leaves feeling heard, you know, facilitating meetings, you know, speaking of being heard, so they're shorter and effective, and people leave the room feeling like their opinions matter. Giving performance feedback while building trust, you know, managing implicit biases. I mean, I could go on, but that gives you some ideas. Number 10. So where do you start? Okay. You're intrigued, you're in this Facebook group, Conscious Communication for Work. That's a good start. We'll certainly be doing some trainings right here in this group, but a few other options. Read Marshall's book. It's really the big book of this work, and you'll want to have that for reference. You can read my book. My book, The Healing Power of Empathy, is meant for beginners, and it's very readable. It's a book of stories that kind of put the skills into little anecdotes, little a la chicken soup for the soul. So it's like kind of like a coffee table or read before bed kind of thing. Find an online intro. So something 90 minutes or so at least. NVC Santa Cruz, it's the NVC organization that I'm most affiliated with, has online classes monthly right now. NVC Academy is another great option. Lots of NVC trainers on there, and you can learn quite a bit. After that, you can check out, there are videos and other Facebook groups that focus on different NVC skills, but the quality of all of these things can be variable. So I wouldn't necessarily start out with them only, or you might get a bad taste in your mouth for no reason. But I do really encourage you to find an intro to take somewhere. If you can gather a group at work, you can reach out to me to Zoom in or come in person. But yeah, at least to me, there's something really important about receiving like a comprehensive intro where you can start to hear how this stuff sounds. That's where the different skills and concepts really come to life, when you can kind of hear the difference between like what we tend to usually say and how it can be, how things can be handled differently. So that's 10. Did it in 10. Last thing before we say goodbye, make sure that you've liked the Conscious Communication, the business page, in addition to this group, and prioritized it in your settings so that you can see all that content first in your feed. And while you're here, leave me a question or a comment below. What would you like to learn more about? This is how I develop my content, is based on the questions you ask. That's what gives me my ideas. So I would love to hear from you. So that's all for now. Thanks, everybody.